Hi there, fellow primates. I hope this video finds you well on this late Friday afternoon, 4:45, windy and rainy. Blah, I thought that spring had started yesterday, but I clearly was wrong. I hope you've all been luckier than my wife Sarah, because she's got the COVID on Wednesday morning. She tested positive. She was away for work to meet for the very first time the team she has been managing remotely, but it wasn't to happen. She and another colleague tested positive. They probably picked it up last week Friday when they visited the local offices here in Croydon. But now she's got it, and despite being double jabbed and having been boosted, she feels really crap, very tired, coughs a lot. So it's not pleasant to have, even when you're fully vaccinated. But sadly, she doesn't have the luxury of being able to rest and recuperate because her work is so busy. She was at her desk last night until 9:45. She had her lunch and her dinner there at her computer. When I go in, I mask up when I bring her coffee and food, because so far I've tested negative, and I'm going to travel myself next week, so I want to keep it that way. So we're going to segregate the house a little bit, which is a bit sad when you see each other, but you can't really get near each other. It feels really, really odd. Now, I've had a busy week this week. I didn't have time to delve into the literature to prepare a journal club style video, so I thought I'm going to do something that takes far less of my time, and just riff a little bit about something that I find interesting. So I'm going to riff a little bit about why I find some of my intellectual heroes so inspiring, and I want to focus on a specific aspect: people's complete absorption, obsession with their work, their complete dedication to their craft, be it science, be it writing, and they're almost the way in which their personalities and their personas are defined by what they do. Now, take an example, for instance. This is one of my favorite writers, Stephen King, and he writes every day. If he is writing, he's writing every day. Otherwise, the stories just become stale. And he used to say in interviews, now, of course, 4th of July, Christmas, my birthday, I wouldn't write, but that's all a lie. He has admitted he writes every single day, and that's the way it has to be. And that unbelievable, constant dedication to a craft, of course, is a major reason why he's so unbelievably prolific, which is true as well of this guy. Frank Zappa, one of my very favorite musicians, the man was phenomenally hardworking. Sometimes he worked very strange hours through the night, getting up in the afternoon, working during the quiet hours when the telephone wouldn't ring, when other people were sleeping. A man who died very sadly, too young, of cancer, but a complete and utter dedication to his craft. And in an interview, he gives an interesting, succinct sort of summary of what it is like to be him. And this is an interview. I'm going to just quote to you the last paragraph of an interview in Playboy. Oh, you've got Playboy here, don't you, Ralph? No, it's not as exciting as that. I've got a printout from the interwebben. And he's being asked about his life and whether his cancer that he had at the time was changing his work. And he said, no. He says, the thing is time. Time is everything. How to spend time. We all want something to do with our minds. The choices are major human preoccupation. The people who find the easiest solutions, like beer and football, might be happier if they had just a little dimension to their lives. But most people, once they achieve a certain level of gratification for time disposal, don't go beyond it. They already know how good they're going to feel when a football game comes on, and they have their beer. They don't want to know beyond that. They build a life around it. It's been the same for me since I got cancer as it was before. I have to look way beyond the football game and the can of beer. Once I've gone out there and dabbled on that fringe, I feel as if I may as well bring some artifacts back in case anybody else is interested. That is what I do. I come back and go, here it is. This is what happened after the football game. And it's just a beautiful way of expressing his dedication to composing and playing his music. Now, as a very dedicated beer drinker myself, I think perhaps it can and should be justified to reserve time for the beer drinking as well, because that creates work-life balance. But I guess for people like Frank Zappa, work-life balance was a chimera. Work was life, life was work. He was completely dedicated to it, and that's what he did, and that's the end of it. And it turns out that many of the people whose work I enjoy, they have that same enthusiasm, that same burning passion to keep working no matter what, early in the morning to late at night, until death makes that impossible. that sort of enthusiasm is the defining hallmark. I think enthusiasm, the etymology of it, means something like the possession by God or the intake of God. And most of my heroes actually have that feature. So look, for instance, at the late Roy Porter. He was a historian of medicine. He worked in the Wellcome Institute here in London, and he was an astonishingly prolific writer. At some point, somebody asked, what book are you working on? And he said 14 books. And that was not a boast. That was not an exaggeration. It wasn't a joke. It was a simple statement of fact. He was always editing and writing books. When he died at the premature age of 55, he was found dead beside his bicycle coming home from working on his allotment. He had already published more works than, I guess, 2 people would have in an average career. An absolutely dedicated, monomaniacal hard worker. Just a little anecdote. He lived in London. He would go to Cambridge University at the crack of dawn to raid the university libraries. And then at the platform on his way back to London, he would bump into colleagues who would live in Cambridge. And they were going into work. But Roy had already come from London to Cambridge, photocopied half a library, and was on his way back. Another little anecdote, he had a guest staying at his house, and she was wandering through the house in the middle of the night, I think like 3 in the morning, trying to find a toilet. And she saw light in the kitchen, and there Roy Porter was at his kitchen table, deeply immersed in the work of Aristotle. Now, that complete and utter dedication is a major factor why he was so prolific. And the same was true for Simon Sharma. I think they were students together. Sir Simon Sharma, another unbelievably prolific historian and writer, and also a man who, especially when he had younger children, got up before dawn so he could write in the very early morning hours before family life started up. And in an interview that I read a couple of years ago with his daughter Chloe, she said that the incessant clickety, 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 clack on the keyboard is one of the sounds that define being home for her. Dad was always working on his computer, and so that clickety clack sound is just one of the wallpapers of her life as a child. So that's interesting. Another person who clickety clacked all the time was the late Christopher Hitchens, perhaps one of my favorite prose stylists. If you talk about, the texture of his non-fiction writing, he boasted, proudly so, that he would produce on average every day 1,000 printable words of copy that he, of course, published in magazines, newspapers, and in his many books. And he was also completely dedicated to that craft of writing. In an interview, he said, writing is not what I do. A writer is who I am, what I am. It wasn't for him a separate aspect of his life, the writing. The writing was his life. He couldn't imagine life without it. He wouldn't want to live a life without it. He said, I feel unhappy when I'm not doing it. And that complete dedication was still visible when he was terminally ill with cancer. And he was physically too weak to sit at the desk and to keep his head upright, but he was still in the hospital writing book reviews. Now that unbelievably that unbelievable focus and dedication to work, that identification with your chosen craft, I find deeply inspiring. And age doesn't have to be a hinder or a hurdle at all. So in this picture you can see myself with Professor Rudolph Newman. And Newman is my oldest friend, as in literally. He turns 95 this year. He is a neuroanatomist, one of the world's biggest experts on the structure of vertebrate nervous systems. And to this day, if I would call him up now, he'd probably be working still on scientific articles, author of many books, reference works, an unbelievably continuous dedication to his work. And if you would ask him, well, don't you want to do something else? He would probably not even understand that question. It's like, well, this is what I can do, what I do best, what I enjoy doing. That's my life. And, on the theme of age, this guy, Ernest Meyer, he died when he was 100 years old. He published this book in the year he turned 100 years old. What makes biology unique? I think every generation has their own Ernest Meyer, defined by the different types of books that he wrote at the time and that people were reading. For me, there were books like this, The Growth of Biological Thought from 1982, or toward a new philosophy of biology. Two influential books for me as a biology student that I consumed voraciously. But these are books that were written when he was already retired from his position as professor at Harvard University. And he was also one of these people who just knew how to organize his day in such a way that he could be maximally productive. When he was the director of the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Harvard, he maintained his scientific productivity by getting up at 4:30 in the morning, writing until 7:30 in the morning, then going to work and do his administrative duties, and then in the evening use his time to read the scientific literature. Now, that very organized, completely and totally dedicated scholarly life is one of the reasons why he was so prolific and such an influential voice in evolutionary biology. And the same is true for the late Earl Wills, and he died at 92. He was still busy in various projects at that age. And when he was a young scientist, I guess in his 40s, his first two big books that he wrote pushed his work week up to 80-hour weeks. When he was writing The Insect Societies, that was published in 1971, and Social Biology, the New Synthesis, published in 1975, he said in his autobiography, Naturalist, that, if you add that to his responsibilities in teaching and administration at Harvard and his ongoing research program in ant biology, 80-hour weeks. Now, if you think about that, that means if you work 11 hours a day, 7 days a week, then you don't get to 80. He worked all the time, absolutely all the time, and he wouldn't want to have had it any other way. He had a home laboratory where he worked on his monster monograph on the ant genus Pheidole. I think he described more than 300 new species when it was published in something like 2002 or 3 or 4. And that's what he did at home. He would just never stop working, writing, doing research, teaching, because it was an all-consuming passion for him. And if you read his book Consilience, he actually says this as well. If you want to be a natural scientist and an academic, he says, over the years I've been presumptuous enough to counsel new PhDs in biology as follows. If you choose an academic career, you will need 40 hours a week to perform teaching and administrative duties, another 20 hours on top of that to conduct respectable research, and still another 20 hours to accomplish really important research. This formula is not boot camp rhetoric. It sounds like boot camp rhetoric to me, because I love my job, I love my work, but I get tired. And I do like to sometimes take time out, not always, in the weekends, in the evenings, to spend time with my wife if she's not horribly ill and infectious. I like cooking, I like hanging out with my friends, I like drinking, I like watching movies. I like many of the things that people fill their lives with when they're not working. But for some people, their work really equaled their life. And that was true as well for no person as much as for the late Jay Gould. He was one of my earliest intellectual heroes, scientific heroes. You can see him here clackety-clacking on his old trusty Corona typewriter. And he was fucking hardcore. When he was diagnosed with the cancer that eventually killed him, he got brain surgery, and 4 or 5 days later he was back in the classroom at Harvard University teaching his undergraduate students. His mom was at some point because at the last months of his life, his mom actually came to support him, spent time sitting quietly in his office as he worked, walked him across campus. And then when he was lecturing, at some point he got a coughing fit, and she would come and hand him juice to help him. But he was so hardcore. Who goes after brain surgery a few days later, or even a week later, or 2 weeks later, back to teaching students? A very demanding job. When he was younger as well, he, of course, infamously suffered from mesothelioma and asbestos exposure-related cancer. I think he was diagnosed in 1982. And at that time, he was working on what became a very famous paper with Elizabeth Verba on acceptation. They were writing this together, and Elizabeth Verba remembered that they would have to stop regularly because Gould needed to go to the toilet to violently vomit, and then he would come back to work with her. So even being very, very, very gravely ill, still continued to work, It's just one of these things. In an interview, he said, I work in the weekends, I work every evening, because he says, that's my life. I like to do that. And that unbelievable dedication, that almost monastic dedication to your work, I find inspiring. Another person who I find inspiring for partly the same reasons is the late Oliver Sacks, the neurologist and writer. He was a friend of Stephen Jay Gould later in their lives. And I just love this photo of him. He's standing in front of the entrance of the Centraal Station, the central train station in Amsterdam. And this is so typical of him. He could never stop scribbling. He just dropped everything on the floor and had to record his very thoughts. He, almost like no one else, needed to have this continuous recording of his train of thought. In an airplane, he would scribble on the menu and on napkins. He was a diary keeper all his life, so I don't know how many millions of words he wrote in his lifetime, but always busy translating his thoughts onto paper. It was a form of a dialogue with himself to really find out what he really thought. And very inspiring. And you could see for all these writers, all these scientists, all these historians, that enthusiasm expressed itself in their work. And that's why so many people like reading their work, because you could see why they were so excited about what they were doing. And I remember I once sent an article that I wrote in the Paleontological Association newsletter to Sacks, because it had been inspired by a piece that he had written. And he actually wrote back to me, and that was the sweetest thing. I was at the time a postdoc at the University of Bath, and he said, "Dear Dr. Jenner, I thought I'd written to you, and this letter may be I can't even pronounce that, supererogatory. Anyway, your letter and reprint are still in my inbox, so perhaps I did not. Unfortunately, I've developed an eye problem. He got cancer of the eye, and eventually that killed him when it metastasized. And I can only read rather slowly with a strong magnifying glass." So he was reading my article with one eye with a magnifying glass. He said, "Nevertheless, I very much enjoyed your wide-ranging thoughts on analytes and archetypes, etc. If my own scotoma were not so large," so scotoma is a term for a blind spot, and it was actually an essay on scotoma that triggered me to write my own essay and then send that to him, saying thank you for the inspiration. He said, "Were not my own scotoma so large, I could be more detailed, ... And then he said this, "You seem to me to be a born essayist, like my late friend Stephen Jay Gould. I wonder if this has some mysterious underground connection with being an evolutionary zoologist in love with invertebrates. My special fondness, as you can see from my logo," there we go, "was for cuttlefish, etc. A Dr. Rees was the evolutionary tautologist back in the NHM in my school days. I would haunt the place with best wishes." To get this as a young I was an aspiring scientist, I was a postdoc, but to get this as a junior researcher from a person like this, so encouraging, so flattering, was just immensely gratifying. And that's why, of course, I keep this letter, and I'm quite proud of it. And so, yeah, you can, just wrapping up, that sort of enthusiasm that people have. It could be a teacher in college, it could be a writer. These people can make you interested in anything. And that's why even in schools, you may not really know what you are interested in yet, but the enthusiasm of specific teachers for their topics can be the thing that determines what direction you want to go in as well. So, for instance, this is now Ferguson. He's a historian. He is an historian of financial history. I have zero pre-existing interest in this, but when I read his book, The Ascent of Money, I was really fascinated. I have since read a number of his books because you can see in his writing how unbelievably interested he is in it, and his enthusiasm is the vehicle that carries that to the reader, and you can't help become fascinated by it. But he's also one of these guys that shows the flip side of being completely dedicated to your work. I mean, he is a workaholic by any measure, and he admits that. He once was asked, how do you balance work and life? You have a family and children. He's divorced now, and he has another wife and children. He said, there isn't a balance. You do one or the other. You can't really do both. I think I disagree. You can do both, but it just depends on you being willing to reserve time for more things than work. But he's one of these inspiring people as well. I mean, when he wrote The Ascent of Money mostly on airplanes, because he was asked, how do you write so many books? He said, well, don't be prissy about it, just write anywhere. He says, I write in airplanes, I write in airports, I write books in the back of a minivan when I'm away with a film crew somewhere. Just, don't be prissy, just get your laptop out and write and focus. So, very interesting, very inspiring. Next week, I may not record a video at all because I hope to travel to Norway to deliver a seminar at the Center for Ecological and Evolutionary Synthesis at the University of Oslo. And I'm also going to spend some time there with my friend and colleague Ivan Undheim. And I know, I will probably not have time to record anything because Ivan is a notoriously hard worker as well. This is a picture that was taken 2 minutes to 1 in the morning on a Thursday 4 years ago when I was visiting him and we were working on a paper that we published last year on horizontal gene transfer of venom toxin genes in centipedes. And, maybe because I'm a little older, but no, he has this energy to keep going all the time. We would stop for dinner, the kids would be put to bed, then we would go back to work, and then around 11 or maybe 12 we would finally finish and then have some alcohol and have a good chat. And he could, I think, function on 5 hours a night or so. I cannot function on 5 hours a night, even for 2 days. But, he's a strong man. But anyway, as long story short, I may not have time to record videos because we'll be working next week and the week after, and I hope having some fun as well. Enough words for me. It's already 21 minutes. It's so easy to fill time, isn't it? I hope you all have a lovely weekend. I hope you all stay safe, that you don't get COVID. And in about 2 weeks, I should be back with a new video. In the meantime, ciao and enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.